Righty, ladies and gentlemen, it is time for us to have a pretty important discussion today. And that discussion is going to be centered around the 1.x units. And by 1.x units, I'm talking about all of the limited characters in Wuthering Waves that were released between, well, version 1.0 and version 1.4 of the game. Okay, yeah, you're gonna need to stop talking while I'm talking, okay? What I wanted to do in this video was go over some of the biggest issues that I'm finding with the 1.0 characters, the easiest ways to fix them, and of course, some next steps for us over here as a community and for the developers at Kuro Games to ensure that these kind of situations don't happen too frequently in the future. Because right now, it's no lie at all to say that there's a bit of a gap, a bit of a rift forming between the older members of the roster and some of the newer ones. All right, so first things first, the topical area that I'm going to be talking about is probably the most important one when it comes to balancing the roster out. And that is going to be something called echoes. It's no lie at all to say that all Sonata sets in this game were not created equal, ladies and gentlemen. And I think the best example that I can show you all isn't by actually taking a look at Jinsei, but it's by taking a look at another 1.0 unit, Jian. So Jian is a unit over here that was released in version 1.0, and the Sonata set that he was centered around in his 1.0 days was the Sierra Gale set. 10% arrow damage, followed by 30% additional arrow damage for 15 seconds after using an intro skill. This Sonata set has a couple of complications, right? You can't use it while you're solo, you need to have a teammate to intro skill to, and its overall damage bonus isn't really high. 40% arrow damage is, I mean, you compare it to the value of a 3-cost. A 3-cost Echo just gives you 30% off rip. This is about 10% better than the 3-cost Echo. Then you go ahead. Let's go ahead and compare it to another set that came out, Gusts of Vulcan. Gusts of Vulcan does a couple of things. It gives you 10% arrow damage, and then gives you 15% to your entire team, and then 15% to yourself for 20 seconds after you inflict arrow erosion. This is effectively the same exact bonus as Sierra Gale, but it's split across your team. And so, on top of Sierra Gale's bonus of 40% arrow damage, you're also buffing the entire team by 15%. That's just better. That's just better than Sierra Gale, with the condition here being that you're a character that can apply erosion. Only Chakotay really gets a lot of use out of it, though. You're seeing as the sets get more specific, their abilities get stronger. Now you got this set, Windward Pilgrimage. Hitting a target with arrow erosion increases crit rate by 10% and grants 30% arrow damage bonus. This is just Sierra Gale with 10% crit rate on top of it. That's insane. A 2.4 Sonata sets bonus is the same exact bonus as a 1.0 characters, except they just put 10% crit rate on top of the existing effects. Ladies and gentlemen, is it really that surprising at all for us to see that some of these older units are falling behind in terms of overall damage that they're producing, when you can see that there's a gigantic rift in the sets that are being used in the first place? A whole maxed out substat for crit that goes up to 10.5%. That's nuts. And this is the thing. We're talking about some of the more newly released units, right? But this is the situation over here. And this is what makes it kind of feel a little bit icky. Camellia is a unit that released in version 1.4 of the game, right? She was released in a very normal cycle. She uses this set, which is entirely focused on, right? It's the same exact bonus as Sierra Gale, but you build it up by using basic or heavy attacks. That's 40% damage bonus. The character that was released right after her in the same exact release cycle was Carlotta. Now let's take a look at what Carlotta's signature Sonata set actually looks like. 12% skill damage. On top of that, you get 22.5% Glacio. So you're already at 34.5. Then you get two 18%. So that's 36 plus 34.5. This thing gives 70.5% total damage bonus to Carlotta. Every other 1.0 DPS is using a set that gives them 40% damage bonus. This one gives Carlotta 70.5. And obviously, Carlotta is one of the only units in the game that can actually trigger this because it requires multiple uses of your liberation. But this is like almost a whole 100, this is like 80, 70, 80% stronger than the 1.0 Sonata sets. And yes, right, there are some 2.0 sets that aren't great, right? Like Midnight Veil is kind of dog shit, right? It doesn't feel that much of an upgrade over Moonlit Clouds. Empyrene Anthem is like, okay, but then you realize how little damage coordinated attacks do, and you're mostly just using it as like a buffing side grade for Moonlit Clouds. And then pretty much every other set aside from those two is like giga crack. Like Eternal Radiance is 25% spectro damage on top of 20% crit rate. That's basically the same bonus as a 4-cost Echo that gives 22% crit rate. But then when you go on Eternal Radiance, you get 25% spectro damage, which is about 15% less, but most people would trade 15% damage bonus for 20% crit rate. I think that's a trade that most individuals would make. So hopefully the picture has been painted pretty clear over here. I probably don't even need to get into like Crown of Valor, which is 30% attack and 20% critical damage. This is the biggest gap that exists on the roster. This is the biggest gap that every single 1.0 unit has to overcome. It's the fact that their Sonata sets are on average close to 50% weaker, if not more, than every new set that's been released in the game. And this is the simple thing, right? All we need to do is just release more Sonata sets, or my preference would be retroactively go back and buff these. Okay? Maybe we can do some cool, fun, interesting stuff to maybe tailor these Sonata sets a little bit more. But one thing's for certain. Nobody on the roster uses Celestial Light except for Jinxie. Nobody. There's not a single character that wants this thing. And so you could just tailor this effect, modify it after the fact, to make it so that it activates specifically based off of Jinxie's conditions. Like, using a resonance skill increases your spectral damage or something like that. I don't know. And then make the bonus larger. Because at the end of the day, who's using this set? Jinxie, right? She's using Celestial Light. Who's using Sierra Gale? Nobody except Gian. Maybe Alto, but if you're playing Alto with Sierra Gale, we've got bigger issues going on. Who's using Havoc Eclipse? You got Havoc Rover as well as Camellia. Both could use a stronger set. I think that this is actually a great way for them to go about it, right? Keep it basic attack, but just increase the bonus even more. We need these older Sonata sets to catch up, right? And it's becoming more and more clear right now how big the gap is getting. When you've got characters like Augusta, you've got characters like Zani, who are just feeling way more flexible in what they can build and use. The fact that this just exists in a space of its own, where it's just Sierra Gale, but with 10% crit on top, that's starting to feel a little bit egregious. And yes, Gian can use this when he's with, Cartithia and stuff like that. But I prefer Sonata sets were more of a side grade, as opposed to directly power creeping each other. And this just leads us into a bit more of like a detailed discussion about what these kits are actually all about. Because how much of it, right, Cartithia being better than Gian, or Augusta being better than Zhang Liao, how much of it is actually based off the design of their kits, their motion values, and all the numbers that you're seeing over here, which is really the primary measure of power creep, and how much is it based off the fact that all these 1.0 units are just using dog shit sets? For example, with the Void Thunder set, you have to use a heavy attack to even fully activate its effects. Zhang Liao doesn't actually want to use heavy attacks, and he only uses them to trigger the set bonus. He actually cancels the animation of them completely in optimized gameplay. It's stuff like this where you're just like, man, I don't know why it's really like this anymore. I think Kuro either needs to take a stand in going ahead and buffing all of these old Sonata sets, because the 1.0 units really would benefit a lot from catching up at least a little bit to the 2.x quality Sonata sets, or they take a little bit more of like a greedy route, but a fully understandable one, and just release new sets for all the 1.0 units. Yes, I'm serious. Make a set that's like Carlotta's, and I think Carlotta's is a great example of how they could do it, where it has specific activation conditions, where it'll give a blend of liberation damage and electro damage, but require you to cast multiple resonance skills. Make that one for Zhang Liao. Make a set for Gian, where after using an intro skill or a liberation, boost your heavy attack damage bonus by a massive amount. Something like that. Just give these characters something specifically tailored for their kit, and I think the best way that they can do it without interrupting the grind at all, or interrupting or fucking with the overworld, is really simple. Just make nightmare nests in the 1.0 regions. You see how over here, they have all these like nightmare gold puffs, cur puffs, stuff like that. These aren't in the overworld. These aren't something that you can like go out and actively farm. And the thing is, I feel like something that's been preventing Kuro games from adding in those older Sonata sets, right, was the fact that they would have to make new mobs that would spawn them. But if you just have a bunch of nightmare nests for the 1.0 units that give them new sets, then that's a way for players, right, to effectively farm for them without clogging up the number of mobs that are in here, right? You just need to take some existing ones, add a filter to them, and then call them nightmare. And that would really be it. You're seeing over here, that's not a lot of enemies, right? And believe me when I say this, we still got plenty of mobs in here, right? Brother, where's the Nightmare Who Chief Cyclone? Where's the Nightmare Carapace? Where's the Nightmare Auto Puppet Scout, right? They have all... fucking Nightmare Rocksteady Guardian. And without these costing energy doing any of that, it would feel great, especially when those 1.x units are likely going to be lower priority for players. And so they can choose what they want to farm. And this is also the other thing I would say on top of it. Maybe you could go ahead, and if it feels like there's too many nightmare nests with the 1.0 ones being added, fuck it, right? Maybe you put a cap of 5 nightmare nests a day. A player can choose to do 5 of them. I feel like that's like a healthy limit. Maybe you like increase the spawns a little bit. But I feel like once you get to the point where you're at like 10 plus nightmare nests, I feel like a limit should probably actually be added. Because imagine what the daily routine would start to feel like. Oh, by the way, if you're trying to like optimize your Wuthering Waves gameplay, you're gonna have to actually do all 10 nightmare nests every single day. And if you don't, you're like falling behind. I feel like that's something that would trigger like a shit ton of like burnout and stuff like that. So maybe having like a limit of 5 would be what the team could do. But putting those new 1.x echoes that are, or echo sets that are tailored to the 1.x units, I think this is the perfect opportunity to do it. And you just take the same exact system of like recycling the old mobs and then go from there. Now, it's time for us to move on to the next issue regarding the 1.x units. I think the Sonata sets are without a doubt the biggest ones. And once those are resolved, most of the issues that characters would have would honestly quite literally disappear. Because they would all just be doing and having the same sort of assets that all the 2.0 characters have. But let's talk about something else that's unfortunately a bit of a big issue. And that is going to be a mechanic that I think many of us are familiar with called comfort creep. And this is probably the biggest example of a character who suffers from comfort creep. And the other character who suffers from comfort creep is without a doubt going to be this one. I think that these two units are genuinely the only ones in the game that need some type of buff. I feel like after version 1.0 of the game, Kuro did a much better job in terms of like, some could say better. They made it a big focus after version 1.0 to streamline the gameplay of their characters and remove a lot of like the clunky parts of kits. You'll notice that there's not a lot of characters following version 1.0 that like feel like they can like miss a bunch of attacks, right? Or have like clunky animations, stuff like that. They typically all have like better tracking. They can teleport to enemies, do all of that jazz. But these two units, they don't have those conveniences. If you were to compare the kits of Yinlin and Jeja, who were literally only released within 90 days of each other, they're like night and day. This character, right, doesn't have a single iframe in their entire kit. Everything is interruptible. They have no movement. They require very precise positioning to get their rotation off without interruptions. And swap cancels as well if you can't get that done. This character, you just go onto the field and press your buttons. Yeah, you just go onto the field and press your buttons in the order. And if the enemy's not in the middle of an attack animation, you'll get your rotation done buttery smooth with no issues at all. This is an example of like characters who are fulfilling a similar sort of role, but one takes like half the field time and has none of the clunkiness. And that's a little bit unfortunate. She also does more damage, and this character just does 0 damage at all. Another example of what I'll call comfort creep that bleeds into the kit design is, of course, going to be between these two. I've already said that Jian does more damage than Zhang Liao in their limited teams, or in their best in slot teams, and that's true. But one thing for certain about Zhang Liao is that this guy pretty much lands every single attack that he does in his rotations. If you go ahead and you do a little bit of this, right? Then you do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that, and then just throw out your hypercubes, you'll pretty much hit every single one of them unless the enemy flies up into the air. Like, I'm talking like Morning Ikes or like Alien Baringle, Wind Gorilla, goes on top and starts playing his bongo drums. Those are like the only situations where the guy like this is going to miss his attacks. Then you got this unit on the other hand, where sometimes you'll cast your Liberation, right? And then the enemy will dash, and you'll just be attacking air. And you'll be chasing after it, right? Using your skill and stuff like that. But this is the big issue. Every hit of Jian's Liberation restores his energy. And so if you ever end up in a situation where you ult air and you're chasing the enemy, you don't have enough energy for your next rotation. There's a couple of things that need to be done for both of these units to really make them shine and really make them pop. And so, again, using the comparisons of Yinlin and Jian, for Jian, brother needs to get some improved tracking on Qinglong mode. I would love to see some sort of, like, movement, like, added to his legs so that if he's, like, out of range of the enemy, he'll make more of an effort to get closer to them while he's doing these Qinglong attacks. Because these are about 90% of the damage, if not more, in his rotation. And the fact that it's this easy for him to miss the entire thing is insane for a limited character. His damage, if he's able to get everything off, is insane. It's very good. But the problem can be just hitting an enemy in the first place. We're just going to be running a quick little Jian team in the TOA over here. Don't worry about the clear time or anything. We're just going to be looking at kind of like what I'm talking about when it comes to issues with him. So for this unit, one thing you have to do to optimize his DPS is this. You gotta go onto the field, use your Liberation, and then do this tech called Qinglong Cancels, where you dash before his attack animation ends, and then start another attack while the second is still going on. If you don't do that, he basically does way less damage than what he's supposed to. And the situation is, guys, no other character has that level of complexity in their hypercarry rotation, in their on-field rotation. There's no other character where you need to manually, repeatedly trigger an animation cancel in order to optimize their DPS. I don't know a single one. Almost every other character, when you try that sort of dodge cancel in the middle of their kit, you'll actually, like, cancel the attack. There's a couple out there that can get them going, right? I think there's Encore as well. I feel like dodge cancels like those, honestly, are in the boat of, like, they're okay, but they're kind of only on the oldest units in the game. Zani, she has swap cancels, but not really dodge cancels. You dodge cancel maybe once or twice with, like, the ending move of, like, some hits. But with Jian, effectively, you have to do 7 of them in one rotation. Because that's how many Qinglong attacks he can get off in one rotation. Around 7 or 8 of them. And so brother essentially has 8 dodge cancels in one rotation for an on-field DPS. And yes, you can do dodge cancels on things like supports and stuff like that, but that just makes you rotate faster, not a higher damage rotation. And the thing with Zani is, you rotate faster, it's not a higher damage rotation. The thing with Phoebe is, you'll have a faster rotation, it's not a higher damage one. If you don't do Jian's cancels, you literally do less damage. It's not that your rotation's slower. You literally deal less. So those characters that you guys talked about before, the Zanis, the Phoebes, the Shorekeepers, their damage isn't impacted by dodge cancels. Their rotation speed is, so their DPS is, but not the actual damage that their rotation does. Him and Encore are 2 of the only characters in the game that have a reliance on them to do their optimal rotations. And that, to me, is personally something. I think Cal Charo falls in that bucket, maybe Ling Yang as well. That feels a little bit outdated. And when he's the only limited character in the game that has that limitation, well, it kind of makes a bit of sense if he got a bit of an upgrade, a bit of a buff, to remove that from his kit. I'm just going to be real. It's not a very premium thing to have in there. And while it is skill expression, and it's cool to have skill expression, I'm going to be honest, guys, it also leads to a lot of misinformation about what his damage potential actually is. That's my point on Jian. Yinlin, on the other hand, is another big bucket of worms. This character does absolutely no damage. You look at the motion value of this level 10 ability, and it's not even 1,000%. You look at the motion value of her coordinated attacks, and they're not even 100%. This character does not deal enough damage as a sub DPS. And it's extremely telling that she released in version 1.0, and every sub DPS in the game, aside from Confession Phoebe, deals more damage than her. Every single sub DPS, aside from Confession Phoebe, deals more damage than Yinlin in their rotation. It's actually absurd how undertuned this character is. And I view every single release, every single sub DPS that followed her, as direct power creep, because they were literally starting from 0. This character, like, literally feels worse than half the 4 stars in the game. And that is, honestly, reverse power creep from version 1.0. And she's the biggest cause of it. My take on her is that iframes must be added to her kit. Iframes need to be added to her Forte Circuit attack, where she, like, sits down, right? And then the lightning comes down, and then the coordinated attacks trigger after that. She needs iframes on that. 1,000,000%. She probably could use iframes on the second cast of her Resonance skill, too. The one where she kind of, like, swings it around her and does that. The fact that this character feels like she needs to be swap canceled just to do mediocre damage and have a mediocre rotation time feels insane. You put in all this extra work to figure out how to make this character work, and she just has no advantages over literally anybody else other than her outro skill. And that's the only reason why you would even think about using this unit. Second, her coordinated attacks shouldn't be on a mark basis. They last for 18 seconds. That move, her heavy attack that she does to trigger it, will mark enemies. But if there are no marked enemies, there are no coordinated attacks. This makes her dog shit in Whimpering Wastes. This makes her dog shit in multi-wave TOA content. This basically only works well into single target bosses with a lot of HP, because then the marks won't expire from the enemy dying. That should probably just be removed. She just strikes all nearby enemies with coordinated attacks once every second for 18 seconds. No marks at all. She gets, like, damage bonuses and stuff when she attacks enemies with marks. Just make it automatically reapply the mark to every enemy. Her kit is so outdated, it's fucking unbelievable. And one of the biggest regrets that I feel like any person could make, we already talked about how Jian could use buffs, but Jian is, like, twice as valuable, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times more valuable than she is currently in the game. And the sad news is, it's better to pull Yinlin's weapon than it is to pull her. That's how outdated her kit is. So those are my suggestions on the functionability side. I think her damage across the board also just needs to be buffed by like 50%. That's maybe a little bit too ambitious, but she needs a massive fucking damage buff as well. Like, look at this shit. This is like 800%, right? At max level, it's like 800%. Just look at the past sub DPS characters and the motion values of their kits. Chacona just blasts for 1.1k. Chacona just deals more damage with her Forte Circuit. Just everything is more damage on these other characters, but then these characters don't even feel overpowered. Units like Chacona on their damage output feel balanced, and they're this much higher than Yinlin's, but they don't feel overpowered. That's how fucked up this unit's motion values are. Characters with 1.4 times more than her don't feel overtuned, but that's where she is right now. And I'm gonna be real with you. It's these two units, and thankfully, it's really only the 1.0 ones that feel this bad. Because I assure you, if Jinsei were to simply just get Nightmare Jue, because you can see right now, Jue, when you activate it, only gives you 16% resonance skill damage for 15 seconds. That's the Echo skill bonus. Imagine if you had Nightmare Jue that just gives you 12% Spectro and 12% resonance skill like every other fucking Nightmare Echo, which does the same exact effect. Hers is literally, what is this, 8% worse? It lasts only 15 seconds and it's 8% worse than other characters, on top of being on the worst set. If Jinsei simply got a Sonata set that was on the same level as Frolova's, or on the same level as Carlotta's, I assure you, she would not feel like she's even close to falling behind. If this unit just got a better set like Frolova, or a better set like Augusta, something that interacted with the fact that she hit so many times, then she wouldn't feel like she's falling behind. There are just so many opportunities for these characters to feel like they're shining. Oh, yeah, and if this guy didn't have the most dog shit sub DPS in the game with the lowest motion values, I assure you, his hypercarry team would be feeling a lot better, because people are getting more success playing Zhang Liao with fucking Calcharo in a dual DPS team than they are with using Yinlin. It's low-key, like, not even that hard to play this team either, because they both have, like, the 3 liberation casts. And people are saying Calcharo with Zhang Liao feels better than Zhang Liao with Yinlin. If he just didn't have a piece of shit supporting him as a main DPS, his hypercarry team would feel so much better. That's the situation that I'd really like to focus on when it comes to these characters. I don't think it's like a raw kit numbers. I don't think it's like the numbers in the kit that are causing this big sort of like shift, this big sort of imbalance between how good the characters are. I think it's mostly the Sonata sets. It's the numbers for one character, and then it's the comfort creep for another. But once those are resolved, I feel like we're kind of all set to go. And all you need are more echoes and a tweak to the oldest units in the game to make that happen. I really do think, though, that Kuro Games in the future, it's clear that they've done a little bit of pre-work, right? To try to prevent more noticeable Sonata set power creep. They release things, right? Like Nightmare Echoes in the game, like this gorilla over here, to combat that. But they only did it at the start of 2.0. And it's become clear by now, with all of the new Sonata sets that have been released since 2.0. By the way, it's Gussa Welkin down from here. And the Sonata sets have just been getting better and better. Especially the 3-piece ones, right? Where they're giving bonuses like these. I feel like they should have done a little bit more work in advance, like they did with the Nightmare Echoes, to, you know, have them provide permanent bonuses like this. They should have maybe just made these changes to like the Sierra Gale Sonata sets and all of that way sooner in advance. But this is my take, and this is what I think is going to occur. I think Kuro's going to address this. I think they're going to do it at the start of version 3.0, though. I think they will add, like, Nightmare versions of Sierra Gale, upgraded versions of these old sets, but they're waiting until version 3.0 of the game to do it, because that's when they added their Nightmare main slot echoes. However, I do think that it would warrant happening twice in a version. I think that in version 2.4, we probably should have gotten another readjustment to some of the older sets. Then you do one in 3.0, and then you do one in, like, 3.4 or 3.5. I think having one at the start of the version, and then having one at, like, the literal middle point of the version, for, like, a sort of, like, rebalance patch with, like, these Sonata sets or character kits, would be something that the community would really look forward to, and would probably be, like, very exciting, right? Now people are like, oh, we got, now, you know, version 2.4 or 2.5 is going to feel almost like a new version update, because they're adding all these new things. And I think just having that happen twice a version instead of just at the very start would be a better way to go about it, especially with the fact that we can literally see the Sonata set power creep happening in real time once every version, right? This is what I believe to be the biggest issues. Let me know if you think I got anything wrong over here, if there's actually more issues than I thought, or if I'm hitting the nail right on the head, and if the changes that I talked about were implemented, Nightmare Nest, kit upgrades, you know, more regular updates, if those would prevent more of these issues from happening in the future. That'll be that for this one, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you all thought. Peace.